Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Recovery Roadmap. We're coming back into the afternoon sessions now for a whole new set of conversations. I'm really delighted that I'm joined by my panelists this afternoon. One of the things that we really wanted to make sure with this event and report series is we were drawing on best practice and things that we could do to make sure that we were effective and resilient and sustainable ecosystems going forward. Whilst we know lots of brilliant things are happening right across the UK, and a lot of our focus today has been on that, we also know that internationally there is a whole set of amazing programs and perspectives that we should also be learning from. So this afternoon, I'm really delighted to have my three panelists, who I'll ask to introduce themselves in a second, to talk about, sorry, there's a cat coming past me, to talk about what they're seeing in the various places that they're set up. So we have quite a wide range here. So Vinny will talk to us in a second. He's doing things right from the West Coast in the States, through to Cardiff and Bristol. So some, a selection of cities there. Ruth is brilliantly dialing in today from Singapore, where it is much later than it is for us. So it's super appreciated. And so Ruth can talk a bit to what she's seeing in Singapore. And also, she's a very proud Irish woman. So I'm sure she also knows what's happening in Ireland. And Izzy is dialing in from Ghana. So Izzy is spending time out in Ghana, is looking at how she can support that community, but I know is also working across the UK, supporting communities as well, and has done some great stuff in Bristol, and is certainly someone that a couple of my colleagues super respect and keep telling me that we need to be doing more and more with. So I'm really delighted that we have Izzy as well. So now I've introduced them, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So if we kick off, Izzy, would you like to tell us a bit about who you are and your journey?
Yes, sure. So I'm Izzy Obeng. I'm Managing Director of Foundervine. Foundervine is a social enterprise that was set up to respond to the lack of support we saw in the ecosystem for diverse founders. So we run training programs, accelerators, ideation programs of various kinds, specifically tailored to the needs of women and founders from minority ethnic backgrounds. We primarily operate in London, but as Ben mentioned, have run programs across the UK, including Bristol, Hertfordshire, up north and beyond. Currently based in Ghana, also looking at what our support looks like across sub-Saharan Africa. Outside of Foundervine, I'm a non-executive director for Capital Enterprise, which is a body which does a lot in terms of investment and support for founders in the London ecosystem.
Brilliant, thank you, Izzy. Vinny, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi guys, nice to meet you all. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Vinny, I'm the founder of Booking Live. Booking Live bootstrapped out of a previous digital agency I've run, and we predominantly have booking and reservation software for local authorities in the UK and the US, and then we serve thousands of SMEs really who use the software to take bookings and payments online. That's predominantly what it does. Really rich UX for the customers, allowing them to buy vouchers, redeem vouchers, there's a customer account, all sorts of things. So if you go to book a course or an event, we work heavily within the ticketing space. So if you book a meeting room or a tennis court, anything that you essentially check in and book something online, then it could be our platform that does that. So yeah, really looking forward to the panel today. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. And Ruth, would you like to tell us, how did you get to Singapore? Tell us a bit about your journey.
Yeah, so hi everyone. As Ben mentioned, I'm originally from Ireland. I spent about 5 years in the UK, living in Bristol, where I first met Ben, and spent those years working both with and for startups, both with Invest Bristol and Bath and a company Ultraleap and Ultra Haptics. It was through Ultraleap I moved back to APAC and work primarily across the East Asian region, and then relocated to Singapore about 3 years ago, where I've worked with government to support the international expansion of startups between the UK, Southeast Asia, and Australia and New Zealand. And then more recently, I spent some time with a local Singaporean startup called Startup X, who run both innovation programs, but also accelerators for those targeting sustainability. But I'm currently working kind of a consultancy basis for people looking to continue BD, being a professional victim of the COVID crisis.
Thank you very much. So if we're okay to stay with you for a second, Ruth, how do you feel that I've written in my question your respective areas, the continent of Asia Pacific has been coping so far during COVID?
I think across APAC it's been quite different. Obviously the crisis hit China in January, and that had quite a big impact on kind of manufacturing and supply chain aspects for a lot of different companies across the region. But as they went into recovery, that was at the point that a lot of the other APAC countries then began to go into their own crisis. So Singapore itself was at what we call DOSCON orange and alert level from January to April, but didn't actually go into lockdown until April. So things did continue as normal. But it has had a big impact in terms of travel. Singapore, being a tiny place, relies heavily on travel really across the Southeast Asia region, and also a lot of commuters with different Australia, New Zealand companies. So in terms of managing the impact of the lack of face-to-face and the lack of ability to meet different teams and take advantage of different team bases, that seems to be the biggest impact that people are seeing now. And with Singapore borders still closed and other places China going back into lockdown, that seems to be the trend for the foreseeable future.
Cool. And Izzy and Vinny, you're both spending time across various clusters. How are you feeling that they're coping? Are there noticeable differences?
Who's going first?
Feel free to go ahead, Vinny.
Started now.
Yeah, I guess, Ben, from two perspectives, us with a tech company, 25 staff, clients all over the world, we were already in a great position where we could continue remote working, we could continue the flexibility that we have. There was little disruption to us. The business model that we have, if you look at Ticketmaster and Eventbrite purely based on ticket sales and transactions, massive share price profit drops massively affected their type of business. With our business model and the recurring revenue that we have on an annual basis and the contracts that we have, the long-term contracts we have within the public sector, we were very fortunate, I guess, from that perspective. So we are doing everything we can to help the healthcare sector, NHS in the UK, and public sector, where new opportunities are emerging and where they are now reacting quite quickly to the COVID crisis. We have a solution in place for them. So from us as a business, we're very proud of the team, the leadership team, and all staff from the board down, really, as to how we responded. In terms of our clients, it's a very different situation. As I said, we work heavily within the event ticketing space. They've all effectively gone from either a 99% drop of income overnight and having to furlough, tens of thousands of staff, to the SMEs, where again they've been severely affected, and most of them are having to refund and rebook their customers. So they have essentially wiped off this entire financial year. And we are doing everything we can to support them, whether we're offering them additional support and services, some form of payment holiday, or a reduction in the fees that they pay us. So they've been massively affected, and we really feel for them. So yeah, from our perspective, we're okay. And then within the ticketing space, massively damaging. And we're now putting in solutions for them to help them when they do decide to start back up, start taking bookings and payments again, that are in the best possible state in order to do that.
Cool. And Izzy, how are you finding your communities and how they're affected?
Yeah, so for the founders that we work with, who sort of are concentrated, I would say, in sort of parts of inner city London and sort of other communities in the UK, which kind of have high BAME populations, it's been a really interesting journey, I should say, in terms of access to funding, in terms of access to support, which is kind of often predominantly delivered offline. And we've had to pivot our model quite a bit, due to COVID, and then recent global events have also sort of forced us to kind of figure out what we can actually be doing to build capacity in the community. And so it's definitely been an interesting journey over the last few months. And our response to it has very much been sort of increasing opportunities to network online. If we're used to meeting people, and so much of raising funding, for example, as warm introductions, so much of finding co-founders and kind of building networks is going to offline events and being introduced to people. And so a lot of our activities focused in the last few months with running really engaging kind of community events, bringing people together online, facilitating introductions, running virtual accelerator programs, all designed to sort of increase that continuity of support during this period. Before COVID-19, we had big plans to expand our work across sub-Saharan Africa, working with kind of multilateral organizations, working with corporates to see how we could actually add value and kind of build capacity in parts of the world that need it a lot more, arguably. And COVID-19 has put just a major halt to a lot of that. International borders are closed where I am, and that's affected travel significantly. I'm hearing a lot about people feeling the pinch, investors kind of maybe behaving a bit badly in terms of renegotiating term sheets, people feeling as if they haven't got as much support that they need at the moment to pivot their business model to respond to COVID and different consumer behavior. So a really interesting time, but also a huge opportunity for organizations like ours to kind of step into a vacuum that exists as a result of people looking at their career differently, looking at their business differently as a result of COVID-19.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting perspective of there is a silver lining there, isn't there? And do you think some of the and it's difficult because obviously lots of things are connected, but certainly in the UK, there's a whole set of trends at the moment, whether that's around COVID, whether that's around BLM or around Brexit. And do you feel that, sorry, this is a very big question. Are you optimistic about those in general? And do you think COVID is going to cause lasting damage to the ecosystems, or is it going to open up opportunities in a new way?
I am optimistic, and I say that with a caveat that you have to be optimistic in my line of work. If we are to truly build a more inclusive digital tech ecosystem, if we're to truly increase access to opportunity for people who come from like less traditional backgrounds, then you have to be a bit optimistic, considering kind of everything that kind of tells you that it's not going to be possible for a generation or more. We look at the number of the number of people who come from BAME communities that sit on boards, who are in sort of senior levels within the digital tech ecosystem. There's just so much reform and conversation that needs to take place in order to really make a change. And so optimistic that recent events are forcing our governments, forcing industry to seriously look at internal practices, seriously look at how they engage their customers, seriously look at how they're actually building out the communities around them and actually supporting individuals within these communities to get access to opportunity. And I'm hoping that these conversations actually lead to longer lasting change than we've maybe seen in a generation. So short answer, very optimistic, because I think we need to be in these times.
Yeah, I think if you let it get you down, you're not going to get back up again, unfortunately. Ruth, how does it look from where you are? Are you optimistic about how the ecosystem will cope and whether that will lead to lasting change?
Yeah, I think as you said, you do have to be optimistic. There's going to be a short-term to long-term impact on funding, but the government here in Singapore anyway is quite they're quite strong in developing new grants, new matching funding systems, and new kind of what they call solidarity grants to support digitalization or upskilling current employees. So although I think short term it's not going to be the best environment to be operating in, ultimately there are opportunities. Now there has been a shift for some, say, of the VCs towards the more necessary sectors now, whether that be healthcare, logistics, or any kind of the online services in education and fintech especially. So there are still opportunities out there, and it's just making sure that people are in the right place to take advantage of those. I think you're starting to see the pivots now, and especially the more early stage startups, if they develop platforms that can be used online, they're looking at how they can make the best use of those. I think particularly in the region, there was a lot of emphasis recently on helping to bring regional kind of traditional retailers, brick and mortar online in countries like Indonesia and the Philippines. And I think that kind of trend is going to continue on. And that does give light to some optimism as we go forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ruth. And Vinny, you're in an industry that's very much affected by this, aren't you? Are you optimistic, though? I know you're optimistic, but...
Always optimistic, yeah. Again, going back to the examples I gave of private public sector and SMEs, we've all read about it in the news of how the parks and beaches are just flooded with too many people. We... similar to what Ruth was saying there, pivoted the product and developed a new product line where we've added capacity management into the software. So people can actually go in and book, whether it's waste recycling centres, a visit at the park, a beach, and actually attend at a set time for a set period of time. And that allows the local authorities and councils to manage those open park spaces. And then we've all read about the SMEs who have now gone from the yoga classes and the gym instructors and the PTs who are now doing all virtually. And so we've added in Zoom integrations and everybody's becoming an expert at Zoom and Microsoft Teams or whatever the video conferencing tools there are now. So we've developed integrations for those SMEs, and we've added on multiple new currencies into the software for those clients that are overseas as well. So yeah, we're hugely optimistic. I'm really proud of the team as well. They volunteered their time quite recently at a global hackathon event. This is the largest hackathon event that has ever taken place. There are over 15,000 participants, and the team very quickly developed a PPE resource management solution, which is now being deployed in a few different centres. And that they won their category. So yeah, from over the 15,000 participants, they won, and it was a great representation of the UK, the only representation or winner from the UK. So yeah, I'm hugely optimistic, and whether we look at SMEs right through to private public sector, all size of organisations, there really is opportunity there if you look for it.
As someone who has organised this today and nearly had a shed collapse doing that, I dread to think how you organise a virtual hackathon for 15,000 people. I'm just grateful it's not my job. In terms of, so you've all talked a bit about startups and pivoting, and I think it's an interesting reflection that quite often some of the earlier stage startups are more in a position to pivot. Have you, and you've talked all about seeing that, but have you seen any particular programs that are supporting that specifically? So I guess, for context, obviously, the audience we have here today are public sector policymakers. What we want to be able to go away with is, here are some examples of brilliant programs that you can adopt that will allow us to support our communities. Izzy, I'm going to pick on you because I know I have in fact participated in one of your programs over the weekend. Not this weekend, the weekend in the past. And I think that was a really interesting example of how quickly you can start to make an impact at very early stage businesses.
Yeah, so it might be helpful if I just shared a little bit about why we started. So we started, sort of group of us, all working in kind of management consulting and tech in various ways, because we realized that when it came to starting up, at the time, there was very little out there in terms of structured support for founders at idea stage. So if you already had a business model, if you built a product, if you had a team around you, you'd probably find a few accelerators that could be helpful. But idea stage support, there just wasn't that much out there, and even less so for people from communities that have felt traditionally like the startup ecosystem isn't for them. And so we build programs sort of designed to sort of help pre-idea stage and idea stage founders take their first steps. And as you mentioned, you've been a judge on one of our programs in Bristol, and we work a lot with universities just delivering enterprise education so that young people actually see it as an opportunity for them, something they can get out into following their education. And what we find is that it feels like public policy is just a step behind all the time. So when we talk about enterprise education in schools and universities, as someone who's spent time working within higher education, I can tell you that it's incredibly disjointed, and the kind of digital tech introductions and enterprise introductions you get are so dependent on what university you end up going to. And if you don't choose to go to university and you might end up doing a course in college or going straight into employment, there is very little public support that you can access that feels structured. And then when we talk about kind of people who are post-university in the workspace, when it comes to networking, knowing that, building networks, knowing that building, whether those are investor networks or client networks, are so important, it can feel very, very hard to meet the kind of people that help shape your perspective and kind of give you the support that you need. So I think long answer there, but when it comes to what government could be doing a lot more of, I think it's leaning into the amazing initiatives that are already taking place in the ecosystem. Foundervine do great work, but there are also organizations, there's so many innovation hubs and organizations that operate to support increasing access to entrepreneurship. Color in Tech, YSYS, Hustle Crew, those kinds of organizations, but are underfunded. They're underfunded because access to funding is still concentrated in a few organizations who have been doing stuff for decades and who know how to write grant funding applications and who know who to talk to, but don't necessarily have the reach or the relevance to be able to target learning appropriately. So I think there's a lot more government could be doing to step in when it comes to increasing awareness of funding opportunities available, supporting and uplifting initiatives already taking place, and actually building capacity within the education ecosystem in order to help young people actually navigate their careers more effectively.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how much I agree with everything you said there. As someone who runs a small organisation that does similar things, that often has to fight an uphill battle, yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Ruth, you've worked both for startups and scale-ups yourself, but you've also helped design programs and work with programs. What examples have you seen that are supporting early stage startups?
I think it actually goes back to hackathons again, not quite the scale of the 15,000, but StartupX, who I recently worked with. So they actually originated from running hackathons in Singapore, but with a regional and global focus. And what they realized about 8 years into running, there was just a panel of volunteers running these hackathons, was that there was all these great ideas coming out. But then, despite the number of accelerators in Singapore, very few were focused on that early stage or ideation phase of a startup. So StartupX was kind of born into that idea of how do we take on those ideas and the kind of the champion of the ideas from those hackathons and bring them right through then to our stage where they can get funding. So they started to run what they call pre-acceleration programs on the same ethos, the same building blocks of an acceleration program, but really helping people to build out the idea and understand how they can run a business model, how they can figure out what they need to do, if it's lean canvas or whatever, who they need to talk to and learn how to pitch. But the other aspect of that is that there's a lot of collaboration with the universities as well. So I sat in a few different panels here with National University of Singapore, and they have quite a few different entrepreneurial societies for people who are early stage. And all of the societies are entirely run by students, but they learn and they teach every element of what it takes to build startups. By the time any kind of VC or anyone comes in to take a look at these different teams and companies, they've already built out the bulk of that idea, and they are learning those connections from the very beginning. And they bring in both industry partners, but also government players to help them to then continue on from university and not lose the momentum that they've built up. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And Vinny, am I right in thinking Booking Live have tapped into some of these programs you've been involved in? I've definitely seen you in the engine shed in Bristol.
Yeah. We've crossed paths many a times. Yeah, some fantastic programs in the UK, but I just want to make sort of one message really to the UK decision policy government makers that are on the chat today and watching this, is that literally put your money where your mouths are. The UK government has an SME agenda that encourages and supports local and central government to spend money with SMEs. Yet in our space, and not just Booking Live, but there are other providers within the UK that have systems ready to be deployed. Yet the two largest contracts awarded by the government went to Amazon and Deloitte. And we know the outcome of both of those projects, and they were a failure. Had you stuck to the agenda that you were already encouraged the rest of the local and central governments to go by, you would have gone with Booking Live or an alternative, and we would have seen a successful implementation. So that's something that I would really encourage in terms of enabling the economy to get back to where it is as quickly as possible. Stick to the SME agenda and support everyone from ground up, really, those individuals and the smaller companies. And I think you'll start to see the economy thrive much quicker than going top down. So that's the one message there. But yeah, going back to the point you made, Ben, about the UK programs, not just Bristol, which has a huge, fantastic tech support in the UK and London in particular. We've been very much part of Tech Nation. There was the Upscale program, which was fantastic and really brought together at the end of last year 30 of the best companies, tech companies in the UK. We're very fortunate to be on that program, and that supported all C-level staff, and yeah, it has allowed us to scale up fantastically. So yeah, there's a lot of support out there on an international scale as well. We've got our CMO based in the US, and there's a lot of programs that he's tapping into there to help Booking Live expand into the US. So in the tech scene, a lot of support, a lot of good programs.
Cool, thank you. So one of the things we talk about a lot in terms of scaling startup communities is around access to investment and access to equity funding. And that has changed quite a lot in the last few months. So looking at the UK in particular, I pulled some figures last night when I was looking at Bowhurst for an early session I was doing today. Year on year, the amounts of money are down almost 50% at the moment. How do you think that the changes, and I think there's also definitely areas where people can raise money that they hadn't previously, and lots of people who may have raised that couldn't now. Where do you all think the investment landscape has changed? And do you think, will that be a good thing in the long term, or is this just creating an additional barrier for earlier stage and disadvantaged communities? To anyone?
I don't mind coming in on that. I think there's been a really promising but slow trajectory towards increasing access to funding. We've seen the kind of growth in angel investment networks. We've seen a growth in VC investment over the years and opportunities to get the grant funding that earlier stage businesses need at the very beginning. And what has happened as a result of COVID is a kind of backtrack on all of those. Everyone's going, whoa. And everyone who is answerable, whether that is to their LPs or whether that is to their, whoever is funding them, everyone's a bit more cautious. So I have had numerous founders kind of come to us and say, hey, we were just kind of in the middle of conversations and they've gone dead, or they want to wait and see, or they're trying to renegotiate terms, all of those kinds of things. And funds that were previously kind of always open have shut up shop, and they're only reinvesting in entrepreneurs that they've already invested in order to keep them afloat during these times. And so the government, I have to say, have done a brilliant job when it comes to things like the furlough scheme and the bounce back loans and the future fund. There are questions around that, but I think that it's all positive, but there's a potential to reverse the great gains that have happened in terms of leveling the playing field and increasing opportunity for all types of entrepreneurs if we don't actually ensure that the schemes that are coming out at the moment and funders internally are trying to understand how they can actually better cater to different types of entrepreneurs. And I'm a bit worried, I think, when it comes to the funding landscape, that we're going to see a real reversal, probably of about 10 years of progress we've seen in terms of leveling the playing field between more traditional founders and less traditional founders.
Yeah, I would echo that. We can see that already. I think, interestingly, so Future Fund have released some of their figures today around where that's been distributed, and it is more positive than I would have thought. So there is a higher proportion of female-led businesses being funded, or businesses with mixed ethnicity teams. There's also, I think it's 45% has been invested outside of London. So that is slightly more than I thought it was going to be. So I guess that's an encouraging sign, but there's definitely real issues that are coming up at the moment. Ruth, how are you, in terms of finance, how are you seeing things where you are?
The region at the beginning of this year, it was already looking like it was on a downward trend. So I think it has somewhat been accelerated anyway. But again, I think most answers, the government have stepped in again. So looking at today, if you put in kind of startup funding just related to COVID, you get something for almost every industry. Most of these are matched funding, which I think will present its own challenges in that it's matched, but there's not necessarily enough private investors or VCs to keep that going. But there's also a lot of split then between the early stage and the late stage communities. So different government bodies here, Enterprise Development Board Singapore and the Economic Development Board Singapore, and Enterprise Singapore both have their own investment arms. And in the last round of kind of budget measures announced about 2 weeks ago, I think they released something like 285 million to be split between early and late stage. Although some of that is to be matched, there are a lot of applications that can be done just for digitalization and upskilling. On kind of the more private side of things, there's been a big backtrack from companies like PayPal, MasterCard and Visa, who would have run quite a few different acceleration programs and given access to startups to both the programs, but also funding and access to the company at the end of the day. But they are starting to pull back on those programs and are focusing more on community building initiatives. So I think it will be a weeding out of the kind of excess startups and ideas flooding the space. And I think you will be left with kind of a smaller group of startups who are seeking that reduced amount of funding. But I think it might be a mixed blessing. I'm not sure how it'll play out.
Yeah. And Vinny, I know you have raised investment. What are the conversations like with your investors? They're focused on their portfolios?
Yeah, I mean, Bonker Wales are one of our investors, and they've been hugely supportive of the deals that are currently on and still spending the money they have there and investing in companies. I think there's always been a gap in pre-seed and early stage investments, but the tech industry pre-COVID was growing 6 times faster than any other industry in the UK. And I think whether you're a PE, a VC, an angel fund, you've got to continue to support early stage tech companies. If you look back 12 years ago when we first went through the financial crisis, a huge opportunity was born there in terms of fintech, and the UK is now the fintech capital of the world, with over 4 billion to the economy. So I think there's huge opportunities to come from the situation we're in now, and we just need those funders really to put the money into those early stage opportunities, and we will, over the coming months and years, not just in response to COVID, but beyond that, see new emerging tech within the tech scene.
Yeah, that would be great if we do. And I guess we've touched quite a lot around inclusion, but particularly businesses that are led by women or people of colour do face a number of challenges. Have people seen specific programs that are there that can help those communities? Because I think we do have an opportunity, as you're saying, Vinay, to access new technologies, access new opportunities, but I think there is absolutely a case to say we need to be supporting some communities to access that straight away. Is a somewhat stereotypically, I'm going to jump to you because I know you have opinions on this. I'll let everyone else form their thoughts.
Yeah, so initiatives that are doing it well. So we love that we're able to channel the sort of very early stage ideas that come onto our programs into a range of programs across London and beyond. And I know that there are sort of quite interesting accelerators and programs taking place, like Bethnal Green Ventures and their sort of Tech for Good offering. You've got Wayra, who have just launched a program designed for founders. I know PwC UK are really trying to increase the number of diverse founders on their RAISE program. And you've got organisations like Hatch Enterprise who continue to do incredible work across London. And what has been really kind of interesting to see is when it comes to funding, you've got Innovate UK, for example. It's been really interesting to see the vast number of applications that they've had compared to previous years as a result of COVID. And two founders that I know have recently been awarded in their COVID response fund for 50k. And we can see, and you mentioned the Future Fund and the stats that came out today. Government's listening. I think we just need to keep leaning in and keep the pressure on to make sure that funding is being sort of navigated to organisations who have the potential to really, really transform our community and design tailored and contextualised solutions to the challenges that different audiences face. And we can only do that when we're carrying on the conversation. We can only do that when we are kind of investing our time and energy into these programmes. One thing we have at Foundervine is a program called the Vine Fellowship, which is open to professionals of various kinds, and it just commits them to 12 months of just supporting founders, because we recognise that we have so much talent within our corporate space, we have so much talent in our SME space, experienced, seasoned entrepreneurs who have a lot to offer, but there aren't enough mechanisms for them to be able to actually support earlier stage companies and create that loop of opportunity that you're starting out, you build your network help you grow, and then you just give back. So great work taking place in different organisations as well as in the government space to increase access to funding, but of course more can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Vinny, just touching on some of those sectors that you're talking about, are you seeing opportunity in how you can support SMEs and you can support other startups and scale-ups through their journey as well? Because I know you're more developed than some of the earlier stage startups. So do your team engage in some of those programs and work to help support startups and scale-ups?
Yeah, I think the upskill program I mentioned earlier was fantastic for us and our C-level staff, and to kind of continue the last point as you was making there, we are and personally as well, supporters of women and tech, and diversity is actually one of our core values. So we do, from the top down, instill our values and reward staff and recognise that within staff, personally and professionally as well. I think what we've got to be careful of, and I've witnessed this myself, is that a lot of funds may just be thrown at a cause for a reason, a political reason than anything else, and can quite often have a negative effect and create a false economy, and really doesn't help grow that particular economy or help those individuals or help those SMEs. So we've got to be a bit careful on what the agenda is there specifically. But yes, as a person, as an organisation, from top down, we're really trying to instill those values, and every year really. I've first set up my first digital agency 13 years ago, and things have massively changed in just that period. And yeah, it's great, especially in the UK. Really proud of what we're doing here, and you see it almost on a weekly basis. Not just within the tech scene, but all sorts in Bristol in particular, as we know recently as well. There's a lot of good causes, a lot of good action that people are taking as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know on that point, one of my colleagues from Set Squared, which has 5 incubation centres across the south of England, one of the things they talk about is managed landings. So there are a number of businesses they work with, and sometimes it's better to work with those founders and say, actually, this isn't going to work, it's not going to fly. Let's manage this in a way to close it in an effective way, rather than allow you to try something that is absolutely going to fail. And I think there's a really important thing in that, because ultimately a lot of the startup community is about us taking risks, and if you take risks you don't get 100%. So it is about us acknowledging that and making sure we're supporting where we can support, but where that isn't appropriate, we don't give people a false economy. So we have 3 minutes. So I have a final question for you both. I think Ruth's having some minor technical issues, but hopefully she'll be back. Hopefully I've not bored her that much. In terms of the economic recovery, what do you think the single biggest lever is that government could use to support our ecosystems? And that could be nationally, locally, internationally. Where do you think we could get the biggest bang for our buck?
Personally, I've been really impressed, as you was mentioning, Innovate UK and all the application funds that are available, how quick they've turned that around. Really impressed, and so hats off to everybody who's been behind that, and really we're really fortunate in the UK and across the world from what I've seen, for a lot of governments supporting individuals and SMEs and furlough schemes, etc. And then the grants are available. Absolutely fantastic to see. So I would want to see that, rather than it fall off a cliff edge, to continue in some capacity. But to emphasise the point I said earlier, the government really needs to put their money where the mouths are and support SMEs. And rather than these big contracts going out to the big companies, where it is blindingly obvious that there are SMEs who can provide excellent solutions, those are the ones who will drive the economy. 70%, I believe, the UK government want central government SMEs. I would just love to see the stats of what they are, and hopefully that will happen.
Cool. Izzy, where do you think the lever is? Where's the biggest bang for our buck to get government to do something to help our communities?
Yeah, so I'm heavily biased, but I would have to say that increasing access to education, enterprise education and digital skills is definitely key. And that's thinking not only about the current working population that's affected, but the one coming up who are looking at very different economic environments that of their siblings and parents. And there's something really interesting about the furlough scheme is that after we kind of stop artificially propping up people's jobs, what happens to those people? Will they have jobs, or will they have to look into alternatives? I think we're going to get a really interesting renaissance of self-employment, and I think that we need to be building in capacity in order to help those people upskill, pivot careers, explore new opportunities, and maybe smaller, kind of more dynamic organizations that require a slightly more kind of nimble approach to working, and increasingly technology driven. So I would say that digital skills education, helping people kind of pivot careers, explore entrepreneurship is so key, and working with the kind of within the education system as well as at the local council level, because local councils know their residents more than anything, is where the magic is going to happen. So I hope there's a bigger agenda, not just regarding funding like we've been talking about, but regarding capacity building more generally.
Yeah. So I think we'll end it there. Ruth joined us now, but we have to move on. Sorry, Ruth.
Yeah, sorry. It's okay.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists today. That's been really informative, really helpful for me. I hope really useful for you as well. We are now moving back into the sessions format, which is on the left of your screen. There's 3 sessions you can choose from. So the first of those is how can inclusion drive economic growth? The second of those is tech for smart manufacturing. And the third of those is connecting corporates and SME for open innovation. So all topics we've already discussed, but they'll be discussing them in detail in the sessions. Please do go across and do that now. And we will see you all again soon. Thanks.